The first time I saw my husband after we returned to China was in front of the Civil Affairs Bureau. Leaning against his car, he impatiently lit a cigarette. Is it necessary? I just went out with your best friend once, and you want a divorce. Besides, I just asked her to help you pick out a gift. Are you so petty? I pretended not to hear and calmly said, let's go in. The next night, I saw Orion cuddling up to my best friend and flirting. Bro, how can your sister-in-law agree to you doing this with her friend? Orion's eyes were full of defiance. She loves me so much, it's only a matter of time. It wasn't until he saw me wearing a wedding dress for someone else that he realized, with a dull pain, that I wouldn't give in, no matter what. 1. Are you too sure you want a divorce? Don't you want to think it over? No need. If a woman wants to make trouble, let her make trouble. My husband finished speaking and turned to look at me fixedly, his tone resolute. Only when you've driven her to the point of no return will you know to regret it, don't you think? I didn't answer, calmly handing the household registration book to the clerk. Confirmed. Seeing this, the clerk asked no more questions and quickly finished the paperwork. Taking the bright red divorce certificate, I sighed. Satisfied, Orion looked at me mockingly. The drama you're about to star in is invested in by me. Now you're divorcing me over a little thing? Aren't you afraid of letting someone else take advantage of the situation? Then he looked at Samantha, my best friend, who was waiting at the door. A wave of nausea washed over me. I didn't want to look at them even for a second, and I quickly walked to the car. The car door, which I had just opened, was pushed back forcefully. Orion pressed me against the car door and slowly approached my ear. His voice was low and filled with gritted teeth. It's just a bag, what haven't I given you? You're making a big deal out of a small thing? I have a temper too, you know. Temper? He has a temper. What about me? I've been married to Orion for 6 years, and he's been studying abroad for 3 years. I always believed in him. After all, not everyone could send me gifts and postcards continuously for 3 years while studying abroad, until I secretly went to him and saw a drawer full of hotel receipts. That's when I realized how he and my best friend had betrayed me during those 3 years abroad. I watched as they walked into a luxury store, and Samantha casually picked out 2 and asked Orion, same as usual? Yeah, send the ones you picked to Teresa, and write me a postcard. Samantha smiled smugly and leaned close to Orion's ear, whispering something. Orion's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. He wrapped his arms tightly around Samantha's waist. You little vixen, I'll deal with you when we get back. Samantha smiled seductively and wrapped her arms around Orion's neck. The next second, the 2 of them saw me not far away. No one knows how I pulled myself back from the brink of collapse after I went back. I couldn't sleep night after night, and I would cry whenever I thought about this. Each of those 300 postcards had a photo of Orion and Samantha together. Those 3 years of gifts were alms from the 2 of them to me. What did they think of me? A dog kept in the dark, or just a piece in their game? Orion kept calling me to explain, saying it was just a misunderstanding. I ignored him, and he eventually got impatient and sent me a message. It's just asking her to help pick out a gift, and she kindly helped. So what's wrong with me thanking her by giving her a bag? Teresa, I'm telling you, you're doing this because I'm indulging you. You're being suspicious, you know you're sick? You should see a doctor. As I looked at the messages he sent, I was gradually devalued to nothing. My heart grew colder and colder. After wiping away my tears, I typed those words one by one. When you come back, we'll get a divorce. 2. Ever since I married Orion, whenever anything involved Samantha, Orion would go back on his word to me. I still remember when I managed to land a role as the female lead in a movie. When I excitedly shared it with Orion, he looked embarrassed and asked me to give the opportunity to Samantha. Samantha hasn't had a role in 3 years, and this opportunity is very important to her. Your career is in its prime. It's okay if you don't take this opportunity. I'll find you a better one later. Just because I'm your husband, your legal partner, I have the final say in this matter. Seeing that I didn't agree, Orion simply tied me up at home and missed the movie's press conference. I owe this to Samantha, she begged me, and I can't refuse. I said nothing. Watching the scene on TV where the director was giving a speech with Samantha, tears falling one by one. My absence from the female lead's press conference ruined my reputation and credibility in the film industry. Samantha appeared as a savior and got the resources of the female lead. Afterwards, the director called angrily and said he would ban me. Before I could explain, he hung up the phone. Orion knew. He knew how much effort and hard work I had put into getting this movie. But he didn't care. Or rather, my efforts and my reputation were insignificant compared to Samantha. Thinking of this, I glanced at Samantha, who was looking at me with a provocative look, and couldn't help but slap Orion. Temper? It's because I don't have a temper that I've put up with you for so long. As I said this, I threw the unopened orange package in the back of the car at Orion. Take it. I don't want it. Every time Orion made me angry, he would give me a very expensive gift. He always thought that I was arguing with him about the divorce, because he had also bought a bag for Samantha. So he hurriedly bought a more expensive one for me. After throwing it at him, I got in the car and left. I didn't look back at the figure of him and Samantha embracing each other in the rearview mirror. That night, I came to the door of the private room because of a text message from Samantha. The room was full of people drinking and toasting. Orion was hugging her and drinking with his brothers. Isn't this your sister-in-law's best friend? You dare to hit on her. Orion clicked his tongue. Why not? Will your sister-in-law agree? Don't get kicked out. Orion's eyes were full of defiance. She loves me so much, she'll accept it sooner or later. I looked up and saw Samantha's mocking and smug gaze. 3. I said nothing and didn't collapse or become hysterical as she had hoped. I just turned around calmly and left. A month later, Orion returned to the home we once shared. The movie channel was playing the movie that Samantha had snatched from me. The heroine was heroic and dashing, every frown and smile exuding a heroic spirit. Orion watched, his eyes filled with a faint admiration, and turned to me and asked, "Isn't she beautiful? I told you from the beginning that Samantha was born for the screen." I watched, and my heart, which I thought was numb, ached faintly. Getting up from the sofa, as I passed Orion, he suddenly grabbed my arm. The next second he pushed me down onto the sofa, but that pungent perfume lingered in my nose, and my stomach churned. I couldn't stop wanting to vomit. Feeling my resistance, Orion leaned close to my ear and breathed softly. How long has it been since we've been intimate? Don't you miss me? The trembling of my body made me even more disgusted. I wondered how many times he had practiced this skill with Samantha. Thinking of this, I pushed him away with all my strength. I said coldly, "I find you disgusting." When he caught the clear disgust on my face, a look of anger gradually gathered between Orion's brows. "What do you mean? Didn't you say you loved me? What's wrong? Can't you keep up the act?" Looking at Orion in front of me, I couldn't find a trace of the man I loved. That was before. I don't love you anymore, so even touching you makes me sick. And I remind you, Orion, we're divorced. Hearing the word divorce, a fleeting look of discomfort flashed across Orion's face. Don't keep saying divorce, it's bad luck. He put on his clothes and left. I knew he must have gone to find Samantha. Soon, a message from Samantha came, and I opened it, watching it like self-torture. The teasing laughter from the phone was not loud, but it stabbed into my heart like a knife. Is Teresa better or am I better? Of course you're better. She's so cold and indifferent, like someone owes her 8 million. She won't even let me touch her, but you're so exciting. 4. Slap. I threw my phone onto the coffee table. The sound stopped abruptly. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, thinking back to all the little moments from when I met Orion, got to know him, and married him. Samantha had never left. At first, Orion fell in love with Samantha, but back then Orion, who hadn't yet been recognized by his family, was just a poor boy. Naturally, Samantha didn't look down on him. Later, he started pursuing me, and after repeatedly confirming that he no longer had feelings for Samantha, I agreed to be with him. Our originally harmonious marriage was shattered after Samantha's divorce. At first, Samantha could still pretend to be my best friend, but after she found out that Orion was the son of the chairman of the Orion Group, she completely lost it. When I discovered their betrayal, Samantha said to me brazenly, You're just taking advantage of me, and now it's time for you to give it back to me. Thinking about it, I wiped away my tears and called my brother. Brother, does the marriage you mentioned earlier still stand? Of course. Okay, give me 3 days. I decided to withdraw from this relationship and completely let them have their way, as if to deliberately anger me. Orion didn't come back for a long time after going to Samantha's place. Samantha's social platforms kept updating, and at first I would look at it, but later I directly blocked her. After selling this house, I packed my bags and boarded a plane home. As the plane took off, the sudden increase in air pressure made my ears ring uncontrollably. In a daze, I thought back to how I first met Orion. When Orion first pursued me, he was sincere. At that time, I cared that he had liked Samantha and was hesitant to accept him. He would pick me up and drop me off from work without fail, and never missed any holiday gifts. What made me let go of my prejudice and truly accept him was when the power went out at home. Orion climbed 15 flights of stairs to bring me dinner and cold medicine. Seeing me with a high fever, Orion cried with heartache. Looking at him who cared for me so much, I finally agreed to him. After being together, I thought that with the passage of time, his affection for me would fade. But no, he was still as attentive and enthusiastic to me as before, even more so. Every time we met, he would bring me surprises, sometimes street food, sometimes fresh flowers. When he wasn't busy, he would stick by my side all the time. Later, he was recognized by the Orion family and became the heir to the Orion family. He didn't change his attitude towards me. I'm so glad I have this other identity, and I can give you even more. After I made my debut in the film industry, Orion felt a sense of crisis that he had never had before. Seeing many male fans love me, he was insanely jealous. Later, he even repeatedly proposed that I give up my career and return to the family. At that time, hearing my refusal and plea, Orion would soften. Until Samantha's appearance after the divorce. Samantha married a rich second generation, but after marriage, the rich second generation changed his face. Not only was he idle, but he also abused her and found new lovers. Unable to bear it, Samantha chose to divorce after the rich second generation's family went bankrupt. An old friend who I hadn't seen in a long time asked me for help, and of course I chose to help. The rich second generation was not satisfied with just getting a simple divorce and wanted to blackmail Samantha for money. It was I who asked Orion for help to solve it. On the day of the divorce, I also asked Orion to send people to support us. After helping Samantha finish the paperwork, Samantha's face changed when she saw the bodyguard who opened the door for me. She asked tentatively, "Did you and Orion break up?" I shook my head. Orion and I have been married for 3 years. Samantha forced a smile and asked unwillingly, "This car must cost a lot. Did you win the lottery?" I was just about to explain when Orion, who was supposed to be on a business trip, appeared in front of us. Samantha's eyes widened as she looked at Orion in a suit. For the first time after marriage, Orion ignored me and looked at Samantha. From then on, everything changed. Samantha picked up her work again and wanted to act. Orion, using my name, got her a lot of resources. Many times, dinners we had planned together were interrupted by a call from Samantha. "Be good, Samantha is your friend, and she's not doing as well as you now, so we should help her more, shouldn't we? I know you're not petty." Later, Orion found out something from Samantha, and his attitude towards me plummeted. I asked him puzzledly, but he said, "Samantha once asked you to pass a letter to me, why didn't you?" Hearing this, I went from stunned to puzzled. At that time, when the rich second generation found out that Samantha had a suitor like Orion, he was very disdainful and asked Samantha to write a letter to reject Orion. I was there when she wrote it, and the letter was full of insulting words. After writing it, Samantha didn't want to be the bad guy, so she asked me to give it to Orion. I didn't want to make Orion, who was already insecure, sad, so I threw the letter away. After hearing my explanation, Orion sneered. "You're still lying to me." Samantha said that she clearly wrote a letter to change her mind, and she expected you to blame her. "Teresa, I thought you were at least kind, but I didn't expect you to tell such lies." During the argument, Orion pushed me to the ground. I only felt a pain in my abdomen, and a hot stream flowed out of my legs. I knew the baby was gone. Its father didn't even know it existed, and it left this world. Orion looked at me coldly as I fell and bled, but he was indifferent. Teresa, I know you're still playing your pity party. Don't pretend anymore, I won't fall for it. No matter how much I explained to Orion, or even endured the pain and took out the test report from my bag, he refused to call an ambulance for me. It was the nanny at home who came back from buying groceries and saw this scene who called a car for me. Orion could give up anything for Samantha, even his child. Now, 3 years after Samantha appeared, Orion and I finally divorced because of her. 5. After getting off the plane, I turned on my phone. Besides my brother's concerned greetings, there were also several missed calls from Orion. I opened WeChat, and Orion's mocking tone accurately entered my ears. Teresa, you're quite something. Even after the divorce, you haven't settled down, have you? What do you mean by selling the house? I can tolerate you to a certain extent, but don't push your luck. You think you can scare me by moving everything out? No way. I'm telling you, within 3 days, move everything back, and I'll consider remarrying you. Otherwise, it's out of the question. I didn't reply, took a long sigh and blocked him. Orion's words made me reflect on whether I had been too lacking in dignity in this marriage, to the point where he thought that me asking for a divorce was just a way to get his attention. I even sold the house, and he still threatened me with remarriage. But this time, I was really done with him. Back in S City, my brother had already asked the housekeeper to clean up my room. Looking at the unchanged furnishings, I felt like I was back to the time before I met Orion. Miss, please rest for a while. The young master will be back as soon as he is busy. I nodded. Back then, I gave up working for the family business to be with Orion, and my brother understood me and gave up his favorite physics to join the company. My brother didn't parachute it into a high position by virtue of his identity, but started from the bottom and worked his way up. Now the family business has become the leader in City A under my brother's control. In the evening, the nanny made my favorite dishes, and my brother rushed over, looking a little tired. Is the food okay? I nodded. Yeah, it still tastes the same. I haven't been to a city for so many years, and my taste hasn't changed. My brother looked at me, his eyes deep. I thought you could even change your taste for love. I smiled bitterly and shook my head. I was naive before, thinking that love could overcome everything. But now I realize it's just a foolish fantasy. Speaking of which, I remembered about the arranged marriage. By the way, who is the object of the arranged marriage? Neil's only son. You often played together when you were young. I don't know if you still remember? I tried to recall, but only a faint outline remained in my memory. I don't remember very well. Is he the one who went abroad? My brother nodded. Now he's back to run Neil's company, and a marriage between our two families is a strong alliance. Seeing me silent, my brother thought for a moment and comforted me. Don't worry, I've heard that he's a pretty good person. Doesn't their family mind my status as a divorcee? My brother shook his head. I've already asked, and Neil himself said he doesn't mind. The dinner passed just like that. The next day, my brother took me to Neil's house. It wasn't as serious as I expected. Neil's grandmother and mother were both very enthusiastic towards me. Teresa, it's been a long time since we've seen each other. You forgot, I even held you when you were little. She then chatted with my parents about things from my childhood. Listening to them chat, I could only squeeze out a slightly awkward smile. Why isn't this stinky boy coming out yet? Grandma, my brother knows he's going to meet his fiancée today, so he's been dressing up for a long time, for fear that Sister Teresa won't like him. Uma winked at me after saying that. I smiled faintly in response. How could I not like him? After all I wanted was a respectful and harmonious relationship, and it was all for the sake of my family. What nonsense are you talking about? Turning with the sound, I saw a tall and slender man slowly walking downstairs. The sunlight was bright, and I couldn't see his face clearly until he came in front of me. He extended his hand to me. Hello, I'm Neil. I only then saw his face clearly, with thick eyebrows and a pair of sparkling and amorous eyes, and his red lips curved into a slight smile. In a daze from the past, I reached out. "Hello, it's nice to meet you. I'm Teresa." Neil smiled. "It's not the first time." Under the cherry blossom tree. I was stunned, and when I heard the word cherry blossom, my memory recovered, and I finally remembered. That year, when Orion and I went to Japan, I asked him to take a picture of me under the cherry blossom tree. But Orion was called away by Samantha and left me to catch the nearest flight back. I stood under the cherry blossom tree for a long time, and then a voice appeared. "Shall I take a picture for you?" I was stunned, and then handed him the camera and took a picture. When he handed me the camera, this gentleman said, "The scenery is so beautiful. Don't let an unsuitable person ruin it for you." I nodded gratefully after hearing that. When I matched the blurred face at that time with the one in front of me now, I suddenly realized, "It's you." Neil nodded. "That's right, we meet again." The wedding arrangements went very smoothly, and Neil set the wedding date very early. While preparing for the wedding, my parents and brother kept ing. Teresa's wedding wasn't done well before, and I thought it was a lifelong regret, but I didn't expect to have another chance. I lowered my head and thought of my parents' white hair and the regret in their eyes when I tried on the wedding dress, and thought of how I had hastily married Orion against my family's wishes. Over the years, I've really caused them a lot of trouble, but not anymore. I'll spend the rest of my time with them. The wedding was unprecedentedly grand. Not only was my photo with Neil played on repeat on the big screen in the center of the city, but many red envelopes were also sent out. Early that morning, Neil dressed neatly and came to my door to pick me up. After sitting in the car, I turned around and saw Orion. 6. He looked at me with a sinister expression, his eyes filled with disbelief. My heart skipped a beat. How could he be here? Neil, who was beside me, sensed my unease and held my hand tightly. His dry, warm palm calmed me down. After arriving at the location, Neil helped me down. I grabbed him and said worriedly, I'm always afraid something unexpected will happen." Neil patted my back reassuringly. "Don't worry, I'll be here for you." I nodded reluctantly. My father led me down the red carpet, and at the end was Neil smiling. When I reached the end, my father handed my hand to Neil, his voice choked with emotion. "Teresa has suffered a lot. Please be kind to her." Neil took my hand solemnly. "Don't worry, Dad. I will protect Teresa with everything I have and never let her suffer any injustice again." For some reason, my eyes suddenly turned red, even though I had been married once before. That time with Orion, there was no wedding dress, no officiant. We just had a simple wedding at the Civil Affairs Bureau and got the marriage certificate. At that time, Orion held my hand and said, "Teresa, don't worry. I will never let you suffer any injustice." Unfortunately, it didn't last. Looking at Neil's serious and sincere face, my dead heart suddenly came alive. The officiant asked me with passion, "Do you want to marry the gentleman in front of you?" I nodded, choking up. Just as I was about to say, "I do," a voice suddenly interrupted. "I object." I turned around abruptly and saw Orion standing not far away, walking towards us step by step. "Teresa, you're clearly my wife. How can you marry someone else?" His eyes were red, and his expression was already crazed. It was so strange. When I was still his wife, he felt that my existence interfered with him and Samantha. Now that we're divorced, he says I'm his wife. I said calmly, "We're divorced. We'll get back together, as long as you still love me." He rushed over and grabbed my hand. His expression was earnest. "Teresa, just say you love me. Leave this place with me, and we'll go back to B City and get remarried." Like many times before, Orion thought I would agree and would stand by him without hesitation. But reality wasn't like that. I pulled my hand out forcefully. I held Neil's arm beside me. "I don't love you anymore, and now Neil is my husband." You? I nodded. "Yes, we've already gotten the certificate. I love my husband very much, please leave." Hearing what I said, Neil broke the silence and squeezed my hand, signaling the security guards to ask Orion to leave. Orion looked incredulous. "Impossible, Teresa. You love me so much. How could you suddenly stop loving me?" "I don't believe it. I don't believe it." His voice could still be heard from a long distance away. After Orion was dragged away, Neil waved his hand. "Don't mind the little incident just now. Let's continue the wedding." No one interrupted this time, and with the witness of my parents and friends, Neil and I exchanged rings. 7. After that, Orion was relentless. He sent me many gifts. There were postcards we saved from our travels together, and a clay sculpture we made together. I knew he was trying to rekindle my feelings for him. In my hand was a stone he had picked up at the edge of a volcano and later made into a ring as an anniversary gift for me. I set it down in the sunlight and examined it carefully, then threw it into the trash without hesitation. Memories? How ridiculous. Now these memories were all telling me one bloody fact, and that was that I was just a substitute for Samantha, Orion's second choice. Even after so many years of marriage, he still wouldn't believe me. Those hurts had drained all his feelings for me. "Megan, Mom." "Yes, madam." "Help me throw all these things away, and in the future, refuse to accept anything from this person." "Yes." Neil came up and saw exactly what was happening. He put his arms around my shoulders. "What's wrong?" I shook my head. "Nothing." "You deliberately let Orion barge in on the wedding day, didn't you?" Neil paused and asked me with a smile. "Why would you think that?" I asked the security guards at the time, and Orion was allowed in. With the Sue and Ho families uniting in marriage, Neil deliberately let Orion disrupt the wedding. I couldn't help but suspect he had some ulterior motive. Was he trying to take advantage of the situation to ask the Sue family to give up more benefits from the cooperation project? Or was he trying to affect the stock price? Many predictions flashed through my mind, but Neil told me the reason I least believed in a calm tone. "I allowed it because I wanted to see if your heart was still on Orion." I was stunned. Neil leaned closer, looked up at me, and seemed to want to look into my soul. "And also, I wanted to hear you admit to Orion in person that I am your husband. That you love me." I never expected this answer. I came back to my senses and quickly explained, "This marriage is not just between you and me, but also between two families. Do you think I would be so reckless?" Neil shook his head. "I know how crazy you can be for Orion, so I have to confirm your attitude towards him in person." I retorted, "What if I leave with Orion?" Neil shook his head, his eyes filled with a kind of madness and obsession. "No, I won't agree to a divorce. I'll do my best to get you away from Orion." I took a step back and looked at Neil in disbelief. There's no need to be so nervous. We're in an arranged marriage." Neil laughed. "Don't you understand? I like you. I've liked you for a long time. But we haven't really known each other." Neil looked at me, his voice steady. "That's just that you haven't gotten to know me." After this incident, Neil and I didn't talk much for a long time. I could even taste a sense of escape, but life still went on quietly. Orion came to my house to find me after seeing that I didn't respond. I don't know what method Neil used to make him go back to Cydia peacefully. One day, it was Neil's grandmother's birthday, and even though Neil and I were still awkward, we had to go to her old house to celebrate her birthday. Neil's grandmother looked at me with a smile. "Teresa, how are you and Neil doing recently?" I suddenly remembered what Neil had said that day, and my face turned red involuntarily. It's okay." Neil's grandmother glanced at Neil with a smile. "Neil has liked you for a long time. When we were young, he told us that he would marry you when he grew up, and now he finally got his wish." I turned to look at Neil, and he avoided my gaze while eating. This little episode passed, and when we left the old house, Neil pulled me aside and didn't get in the car. Instead, he took me for a walk in the manor. "Did you like me a long time ago?" Neil nodded, and he seemed a little restrained, unlike his usual self. "Yeah, for a long time always. But I've forgotten about things when I was young. How can you still remember?" Neil held my hand tightly. "It's impossible to forget." "Are you still angry now?" he asked cautiously. Apparently he thought my coldness after that day was because I was angry. I laughed. "I've never been angry with you. I was just very shocked." "Neil, I think I'm falling in love with you." Neil suddenly looked up. "What? Can you say that again?" I shook my head, and under his disappointed gaze I said softly, "I'll tell you slowly, for the rest of my life." Neil smiled. "Okay." The golden leaves fell behind us, and the story between Neil and me was both an end and a beginning. Neil's perspective. As a child, I found myself involuntarily drawn to a particular figure. Teresa. She was 2 years younger than me and the child of my father's friend. At that time, I could only attribute this feeling to wanting to be her friend. When we played house, I insisted on playing her husband. Later, my family sent me to study abroad, and I was very reluctant to leave her, but there was nothing I could do. Countless times I inquired about her from my family. She grew up, did well in her studies. She learned new instruments and went to university. Later, I found out that she was in love and got married. I wanted to stop it, but seeing her smiling happily at that time, I gave up. To love someone is to respect them and let them be happy. But that lucky man didn't cherish her, and I felt like I had a chance. Under the cherry blossom tree, I watched her look so lost that I wanted to take her in my arms and comfort her immediately. But the timing wasn't right. When I found out that her brother was helping her find an arranged marriage partner, I knew my chance had come. For the rest of my life, I will treat her well and never give Orion another chance.